So, you want to play solo ranked. This video is aimed at new to ranked players, but also used as a self-improvement tool for all. By no means do you need to know everything I talk about here. Most people don't, and even if they do, there's plenty of room for human error. This will be somewhat of a quick overview, or at least I tried to keep it quick. So going into the first checklist, these are things you should already understand or at least have some decent understanding of. If one of those boxes aren't checked for you, I recommend doing some more research as I won't be covering it here. Most players in solo ranked already understand all of these concepts, and if you don't, you and your team are at a disadvantage. I would also recommend, if you're already feeling overwhelmed or thinking that this is too try hard, then by all means play how you want. Just remember, you probably got sent this video for a reason, or found this video because you care about your performance and want to improve. As for most players that come into this game, or new players to rank that just don't bother to learn a lot of things, sometimes it can work, but sometimes it just doesn't. This game has a lot of similar concepts as other games outside of the guard mechanic, so for those players feeling like they've hit a wall, remember that this game's population isn't what it used to be. Players from all skill tiers will be pit together or against each other, since there's simply just not enough players. Your goal while learning should be using everything you've got before you die, making it much easier to either pick up slack or snowball off of what you've done. Even if you use something and not the best way, it's better to use it than not use it. Things you should be doing is actively thinking of how to get best use of everything you have. For example, Sorcerer pull DR on a PT that has his shield down. Electrocute sap strength on a PT and its opener to reduce their damage. Or even sapping to have sedatives kick in. These things are incredibly impactful and often don't get used or sometimes get overlapped. So enough of that. I will now have more checkboxes with timestamps talking about each one. Feel free to skip around. Do note that you do not need to master any of these. It's just good to attempt to learn everything. No player really has everything mastered. Take things step by step, not all at once, or you'll be doomed to fail. Continuing on, those are slightly broad, but I do go a little bit more into each topic. I will assume that everybody knows what Warzone webpacks and journals are. If not, please keybind them and try not to overlap a journal with powerful DR defensives. Do you know your PvE rotation? Can you parse around average or above? Well, you won't use your PvE rotation most of the time in PvP. Even more so unlikely in ranked PvP, it's still good to know how to adaptively get into your rotation. Also, it's very good for understanding what does damage and how, while also learning what abilities you can use while kiting under pressure. If you can parse the average or above average, I would say you're in a good position, meaning you know what to do for damage and your APM isn't too low. Do you have optimal APM? Are you hitting key buttons enough? Actions per minute is key for any game when it comes to competitiveness. Being fast is one thing, but this game doesn't require you to be very fast with most things. Defensives are off the global cooldown, and this is where your main reaction time and MS to the game comes into play. Most PvP matches should have higher APM than parses, since you're hitting off the global cooldown buttons while also using on the global cooldown buttons at the same time. Nearly all of your abilities do something and have some sort of use, so having them keybound to simultaneously use is very important. Do you know what DCs stop your damage, and when or if you should tab off? There's a lot of defensives in the game, and depending on the class or spec, they act differently. For example, APPT Shield will get CDR on hit. Pyroculto will get CDR on hit. Very impactful defensives like Power Yield stops a lot of damage in general, and very specific classes will do pretty much full damage through Power Yield. The best example will be Arsenal's Spell Shot. It will do nearly full damage through it, while for other things, your damage is drastically reduced. Things like Barrier, for example, it is good to tab off with them and support your team on another target, but don't fully commit to someone else, and sometimes it is fine to wait it out to ensure they cannot recover. Most players will have a decent, if not really good, understanding of players' defensives. For example, defense chance won't work if a player is stunned. Are you good under pressure? Can you think of your DCs while still supporting and damaging? You want to get into the groove of doing damage in near autopilot mode. This takes quite a bit of time and muscle memory. For those struggling under pressure, I highly recommend turning on nameplate for self to be able to see your health above your character. Depending on your class, you can handle pressure better and even support other players while dealing with taking damage yourself. The biggest example of this is Lethality Operative. You can soak up a lot of damage from AoE or someone splitting off on you, while also off-healing, CCing, and doing damage. You should also think of the best order of using your defensives depending on your team and their team comp. This is something extremely important as Marauder, for example, and also when you parse, this helps build muscle memory, which is why I recommend parsing and understanding your PvE rotation. Do you know what you can cleanse and how impactful it is? Cleansing is very important, and you can cleanse certain things depending on your class. For operative DPS, as example, you can cleanse Flashbang, Sniper Cover Pulse, Diversion, and Power Text 75% slow. These are things I 100% recommend cleansing if you can. And what I mean by Diversion is that you can either cleanse the debuff while you're in it, and you can get a split second of maybe like 1 GCD of damage without having to worry about missing. It's not 100% worth it, it's more so worth it cleansing it to get rid of the lingering diversion that's on you when you walk out of it. Also, you can cleanse your sniper if they are to get hit by lingering diversion. When they walk out of it, you can cleanse them and they can immediately go back into cover. There's obviously a lot more things that you can cleanse depending on the other classes. I will just recommend pausing here to read. But also remember there's a lot of other good information out there that you can totally look up. I believe Hadi made a cleansing chart quite a while ago. I think it was a 5.0 or 4.0. Can you kite? Line of sight? Look at the minimap? Predict locations while chasing? Cutting is something that will take time and practice. Some classes and players are much harder to kite. It also takes some map knowledge, and there's different things you can do per map to help with it. For example, playing with Nox, playing up, or having a phase and dragging them down and away only to phase back up. This isn't something I can really cover by just going over it, and it's honestly something that could be its own topic of video. Looking at the minimap is very important for chasing and predicting where they're going. Helps you get there faster. When your job is to chase, the minimap is your best friend. If they disappear from the map, it means they got out of combat and are likely regening unless they stealthed again. And the way you would check that is by clicking on their nameplate. Do you know when to support or CC instead of doing filler DPS? Anytime you have filler, you should be looking for VCC or potential to support an ally before your next window comes up. However, some classes don't have much, if any, support, and it's important to stay aware of what's going on to follow VCCs, as it's really all you can do outside of interrupting and doing damage. There's sometimes situations where people do too much damage and you won't be able to off-heal the outcoming damage. But there's also times you can. For example, if someone is guarding, the chances of off-healing full-time being viable drastically increases. Including in tank games, off-healing when it's a game of survival and damage, it's really important to focus on what you're doing. For example, saving burst on a knock you're about to do to get guard out of the way. Can you come up with plans? Can you read the chat if it needs to be aborted or changed mid-match? Plans, even if they are not great, if executed together, they can work. Even if it's harder than another plan, if you have a better plan, offer it. Often there's no clear strategy to win. I usually follow what someone says unless it's really bad, as you cannot control how other players play. Only yourself, and it's very easy to follow a plan. When it's really bad or doesn't work, it's good to offer up an alternative. Sometimes people just won't try it. Sometimes people will. Sadly, that's just the way it is. Even though it is solo ranked, it is still a team game mode. Can you play around guard? Do you know what to do? Playing around guard doesn't mean never hit into guard. It also doesn't mean save all your burst only for non-guarded targets. However, with guard coordination, it is good to do so. But in solo ranked, you will unlikely get into that situation. Some classes will be better at dealing with guard and some won't be. Tabbing frequently to avoid guard is good for some classes, and some other classes actually just do more damage to the tank naturally, like Pyrotech or Lethality. In those situations, it's actually sometimes better for you to just tunnel through guard and keep your dot uptime on both the target and tank to kill the tank indirectly from pressure. Things like CC and Nox are extremely good for setups on unguarded targets, but Nox will be the most impactful as CC does end up getting broken. Do you know how to interrupt and CC? If you have a stealther, it is much better to let your stealther get a sap instead of immediately engaging, so they have a chance to apply sedatives, which basically just lowers their damage once the sap wears off. This typically lasts for 10 seconds. Following that CC up is pretty important and can be done by the same stealther, but sometimes it's better to let them do damage under sedatives, then CC them as it's about to end. There's also situations where they'll just break second CC, and it's good to instantly re-CC as sap is ending. So they'll be white barred with sedatives active, which is negative 50% damage, by the way. You will also want to CC on things like Polarity if you ever see it. Letting a freecasting Sorc DPS under Polarity is a big no-no. Anytime you see a window of someone that is a CC target, not CC'd, you want to make sure that you can throw a mez or a grenade at them to help support your team in the CC rotation. You also want to use your hard stuns accordingly on the targets. For example, hard stunning an assassin after his 6 seconds of immunity is up, or Marauder, or stunning a Juggernaut on his Saber Ward. These are pretty important windows to CC for the kill. When it comes to interrupting, you can interrupt a lot of things. For example, Cooldown Waves, Proc Scan, Innervate. You can also interrupt with Leaps and other CC. You can also interrupt things which are important for DPS, like Thundering Blast for Swtor, Tracer for Arsenal. Also do remember for both classes, they do have one channeled heal, and if you interrupt it, they have nothing but DPS. Since most of the important topics have been covered, I will go over gear, amplifiers, augments, companion buff bonuses, and lastly, set bonuses. Also got a set bonus, augments, and amplifiers in 60 hours of gameplay on a fresh account without spacebarring through story 1 through 50, and without help from outside players, outside of like doing flashpoints by queuing for them. It's all recorded, and feel free to check that out. It has its own playlist. I will show it on screen. So firstly, you will likely want to remove any accuracy you have if you're a pure or nearly all yellow damage user, as it won't help. To give a simple rundown of all stats, 3,000 to 3,400 critical is a good place to be at. 1213 to 1293 alacrity is a low alacrity. You want to get to 1213. That's 403 plus a 407 piece to reach that. However, you can just use 431s and you're fine. Sometimes 5% accuracy on white damage dealers, and the way I do that is 1 accuracy enhancement plus accuracy stem. I usually use the 389 accuracy enhancement, which is the R20, to get more power. The only classes that will really make use of high alacrity are support roles, unless it's lightning or carnage, in which case the hit high alacrity on lightning is 1895. However, I don't remember the one for carnage off the top of my head. I think it's like 2300 or something like that. I do recommend looking that up, but I also don't really recommend playing carnage. And if you do play carnage, I would probably go low alacrity. And I do highly recommend high alacrity on Juggernaut Tank without a doubt. As for amplifiers, in my personal opinion, I will always say amplifiers before augments. The impact, depending on what you play, is much bigger damage-wise. However, if you're more so worried about survival, augments are definitely the priority. While you do not have the best augments, I recommend the 228 augments. It's not too well known how good these things are because you don't see them too often, and it's usually PvEers rocking them on alts. But let's say they're comparable, but not better than 300 item level augments. That's all I have to say about that. However, do keep in mind most bolstering things do get changed eventually, so don't plan on these things for long term. Now to set bonuses. They're really not hard to get, and if you're a class that uses force bound, please get force bound. There are some games that your force bound will not only save lives in openers, but will also solely win games with good force bounds. I know that there's a lot of people who don't wear force bound on Marauder, where if just one of them used it, the game would either be easier or suddenly become winnable. The best example is concealment or AP stacking openers. Force bounding these classes in their openers can not only save people, but also prevent them from retaliating, since it causes them to miss CC, taunts, and damage. When it's PT versus PT, having a force bound on one team and not the other, you will gain the advantage, and it's likely their PT will die first. Now, obviously, emergency power is probably the hardest one to get out of set bonuses. There are other set bonuses in the game for other classes that are also good. For example, evasion roll reset for sniper. There's like 3 different good sets for this class, and they're all situational. While in PvE, people say Apex Predator is a very good set for Arsenal. However, it's a different story for PvP. Well, yes, it ups sustained damage, it removes your ability to super crit your rail shot, which ignores armor, and you have a lot of pins, so it's a very hard hitter on even tanks. So I'll just leave it at that. But basically, get your best in slot set bonus, but also gather defensive set bonuses that will help you. That includes defensive tacticals, as some classes have more options than others. Now we've covered most things to help improve. There's always room for improvement. I have won so many games that not only look unwinnable, but are fundamentally screwed in nearly all ways possible. I still think to this day the funniest yet completely unwinnable looking match I have had was with Phobos on Operative and a healer DPS game for a healer DC'd. So just play out the match. You don't have to give it your all, but at least play it out and you might be surprised. I would love to cover maps, as I have shown some shortcuts in the past, but unfortunately there's no way to really get into these maps without at least 3 or more players, besides myself. So until that gets changed or I find people bored enough to AFK for me, I can't really cover them the way I would want to. For closing notes, I want to make note of things not to do. Do not turn off your chat. Do not ignore everyone. If someone harasses you, report them and move on. If they consistently harass you, continue to report them for each case and move on. But never should you just ignore everyone because someone was toxic. If someone is abusing you or harassing you out of the match, I would definitely say ignore them for your own mental health, but do note you will still be placed into matches with them. And always check your utilities, remember to remove Life Warden when it's on cooldown, and no 306 item level isn't a good indicator of being ready for ranked, and nor is 25 valor.